I'm here at St. Stephen's Catholic Church in Portland, Oregon, and today is what is this week? Is this the 6th week? I think this is the 6th week in St. Michael's Lent, and tomorrow we begin our 9-day novena. Well, there's so much for us still to get to, so we better get started. We have the fourth consideration on the Holy Stigmata from the book, The Little Flowers of St. Francis of Assisi. Well, let's get right to it. The fourth consideration on the Holy Stigmata. We have now to relate how St. Francis, having completed the 40 days fast in honor of St. Michael on the holy mountain of Alvernia, descended the mount with Brother Leo and with a devout peasant, on whose ass also he rode, because that for the nails in his feet he could not well put them to the ground. When he had come down, therefore, from the mountain, the fame of his sanctity having spread through the country, and the shepherds having declared how they had seen the whole mountain of Alvernia lit up and in flames, and that this must be the sign of some great miracle God had worked in him, as soon as the people of the country heard that he was passing, all of them made haste to see him, both men and women, great and small. And all of them with the greatest devotion and desire sought to touch and kiss his hands. And not being able to escape the devotion of the people, although the palms of his hands were wrapped in bandages, he concealed them also beneath the sleeves of the habit, the more to hide the secrets of God, and only allowed his fingers to be seen and kissed. But for all his pains to hide the sacred mystery of the Holy Stigmata, in order to fly the occasion of earthly glory, it pleased God for his own glory to show forth many miracles by virtue of them, and most especially during this journey from Alvernia to St. Mary of the Angels, as well as many more afterward, in diverse parts of the world, both during his life and after his glorious death. In order to buy these clear and evident miracles, the hidden and marvelous virtue of the most holy Stigmata, and the excessive charity and mercy of Christ, so wonderfully shown in his regard, might be manifested to the world, and of these we will only relate the following. One day, as he approached a village on the confines of the district of Arezzo, a woman came to meet him, shedding many tears, and carrying her son in her arms, who had suffered from dropsy for 8 years, ever since he was 4 years of age, and whose body was so enlarged that when he stood upright he could not see his feet. And she set him down before St. Francis, and besought him to entreat God for him. Then St. Francis first of all betook himself to prayer, and his prayer being ended, he placed his holy hands on the body of the child, and immediately the swelling disappeared, and he was perfectly healed. And he restored him to his mother, who received him with the greatest joy, and led him back to the house, returning thanks to God and St. Francis, and willingly showing her little son, now restored to health, to all who dwelt in that country, and came to her house to see him. On the same day, St. Francis passed through the borough of Saint Sepulchre, and as he approached the castle, the inhabitants of the town and of the country round went forth to meet him, and many of them went before him with branches of olive in their hands, crying aloud, "Here is the saint! Here is the saint!" And through the devotion of the people, and the desire that they had to touch him, there was a great throng, and they pressed upon him. But he, going his way with his mind elevated and ravished in God through contemplation, although the people touched him, and held him, and passed on like one insensible, knowing nothing of what was going on around him, and neither what was said or done, never aware that he was passing near the castle or through that country. And when he had passed through the town, and the people had returned to their homes, he came to a leper house about a mile beyond the town. And returning to himself, as one coming back from another world, the heavenly contemplative asked his companions, "When shall we be getting near the town?" Thus, truly his soul fixed and ravished in the contemplation of heavenly things, had no consciousness of the things of earth, nor of change of place, nor of time, nor of those who went by. And this was often the case, as his companions by direct experience clearly perceived. The same evening they arrived at the community house of Monte Casale, where a sick brother, so cruelly and horribly tormented by his illness, that it seemed rather as though it were some infliction and torment of the devil than the earth, trembling violently and foaming at the mouth. And sometimes there would come a twitching of all the nerves of his body, and the muscles would stretch, bend, writhe, and turn until his heels were drawn up to the nape of his neck, and then he would leap up in the air and immediately fall down again. And as St. Francis was at table, he heard from the brothers of the miserable and incurable state of their companion, and being moved with compassion, he took a slice of bread that he was eating, and made the sign of the most holy cross thereon with his holy hands that had the sacred stigmata, and sent it to the sick brother, who, as soon as he had eaten it, was perfectly cured, and never more felt aught of his infirmity. And the next morning having come, he sent 2 brothers who were of that house to Alvernia, that they might stay there, and with them he sent back the peasant, who had come along with his ass which they had borrowed, desiring that he should return in their company to his home. And after remaining a few days longer in the same house, he departed, and went on to the city of Castello. And behold, many of the townsfolk came to meet him, bringing with them a woman that a long time was possessed of the devil, and humbly prayed him for her deliverance, because by her doleful howling and barking like a dog and piercing shrieks she disturbed the whole country around. And then St. Francis, having first prayed and made on her the sign of the most holy cross, commanded the devil to come out of her, and immediately he departed from her, leaving her sound in mind and body. And she, having told this miracle to all the people, behold, another woman with great faith brought him her child, who was dangerously ill with a cruel wound in his body, and fervently besought him to make the holy sign on it with his hands. Then St. Francis, in answer to her devotion, took the child and removed the bandages from his wound, making the sign of the most holy cross 3 times upon it, and then with his own hands replaced the bandages and gave him back to his mother. And because it was evening, she put him immediately to bed, that he might sleep. And in the morning, when she went to get him up, she found the bandages gone, and looking upon him, she saw that he was perfectly healed, as though he had never ailed aught, except that where the wound had been, the flesh had grown together, like to a crimson rose, and this rather in testimony to the miracle than as a result of the wound. For this same rose remained with him all his life long, and produced in him a special devotion to St. Francis every time he looked upon it. In this town St. Francis sojourned for a month, at the entreaty of the devout citizens, during which time he performed many more miracles. And after this he departed, and went on his way to St. Mary of the Angels with Brother Leo, and with a good man who had lent him another ass on which he rode. And it came to pass that because of the bad roads and the inclement weather, though they journeyed on all day, they could not reach the house where they were to remain the night. Therefore, constrained by the darkness and the storm, they took shelter for the night which was coming on, and from the snow which was beginning to fall, in a hollow cave in the rock. And as they lay thus, with much inconvenience and badly covered, the good man to whom the ass belonged could not sleep for the cold. And as there was no means of making a fire, he began to complain bitterly within himself, and to lament and murmur against St. Francis, who had led him into such a place. Then St. Francis, perceiving this, had compassion on him, and in the fervor of his charity put out his hand, and touched him on his. When behold, a new wonder, immediately he touched him with that hand, which was seared and pierced with the fire of the seraph. The cold completely vanished, and such a warmth entered into the man, as it seemed to him both from before and behind, that it was as though he were near to the mouth of a burning furnace. And feeling himself entirely comforted in body and in soul, he fell asleep until the morning. And more sweetly, according to his own account, did he sleep there that night among rocks and snow than ever in his own bed. On the following day, they journeyed on again, and reached St. Mary of the Angels. And when they had come near unto it, Brother Leo lifted up his eyes, and looked toward the house, and saw a most beautiful cross, and on it the form of the crucified, going before St. Francis, and in such a manner that as he followed after it, when he went on, it went on, and when he stayed, it stayed, and such was the splendor and brightness of this cross, that not only did the face of St. Francis shine with it, but also all the way before and behind them was illumined by it. And it disappeared only as they entered the house of St. Mary of the Angels. Then St. Francis and Brother Leo were received by the brothers with exceeding great joy and fraternal charity. And from that time St. Francis spent the most of his days in the house of St. Mary of the Angels until the day of his death. And the fame of his sanctity and of his miracles spread continually more and more throughout the order and throughout the world, although in his profound humility he concealed as well as he could the grace and the gift of God, calling himself the greatest of sinners. Well, St. Francis, seeing that through the stigmata his bodily strength grew less and less, so that he could no longer undertake the care of the order, he summoned the general chapter. And when it was assembled, he humbly excused himself before his brethren for his inability to continue to have the oversight of the order, in so far as to fulfill the office of general. Not that he entirely renounced the office, because having been made general by the Pope, he could not give up his office, or substitute a successor without the Pope's express permission. But he chose for his vicar Brother Pietro Cattani, commending the care of the order to him, and to the ministers of the provinces, with all the affection that he could. And having done this, he was comforted in spirit, and raised his hand and his eyes to heaven, and said, To thee, O Lord, my God, to thee I commend thy family, which thou hast committed unto me until this hour, when, by reason of my infirmity, which thou knowest, O my sweetest Lord, I can no longer sustain the care of it. I commend it also to the ministers of the provinces. They shall answer for it at the day of judgment. And if any brother, by their negligence, or by their bad example, or their too harsh correction, should perish. And through these words it pleased God that all the brothers assembled together should understand that he spoke of the holy stigmata, when he excused himself on account of his infirmity. And for the great devotion that they felt, none of them could refrain from weeping. And from this time forth he left all the care of the government of the order in the hands of his vicar and of the ministers of the provinces, and said, Now that I have given up the charge of the order on account of my infirmity, I have henceforth nothing more to do but to pray for it and to give a good example to the brothers. And I know of a truth that even if my infirmity were to depart, the greatest help that I could give to the order would be to pray to God continually for it, that he would defend and govern and preserve it. Now, as has already been said, although St. Francis was ingenious in hiding as much as possible the most holy stigmata, and ever since he had received them went always with his hands bandaged and his feet covered, he was not able to prevent many brothers from seeing and touching them in diverse manners, and more especially the wound in his side, which he tried with the greatest diligence to conceal. Thus, a brother who was serving him induced him one day by a pious strategy to take off his tunic, that he might shake the dust out of it. And whilst St. Francis did so, as he stood by, he saw quickly the wound in his side. And putting his hand quickly on his breast, he touched the wound with his 3 fingers, and measured its depth and breadth, and after a similar manner his vicar, Pietro Cattani, saw it also. But Brother Rufino saw it, and was assured of it more plainly still. He was a man of the most profound contemplation, on which account St. Francis said of him more than once, that there was not in the whole world a man more holy than he. And on account of his sanctity, St. Francis loved him with an intimate affection, and let him do in all as he would. This Brother Rufino assured himself in 3 distinct ways, among others, of the most holy stigmata, and especially of that in the side. The first was that having to wash the nether garments which St. Francis wore, large enough to be drawn over the wound in the right side so as to cover it, he examined and considered them attentively, and each time found them covered with blood on the right side, by which he knew certainly that the blood continued to flow from the wound. And for this St. Francis reproved him when he saw that he pried into the garments which he laid off, in order to discover this sign. The second manner that the said Brother Rufino employed was that with great care one day he thrust his fingers into the wound, at which St. Francis, for the pain he felt, cried out, "God forgive thee, Brother Rufino, that thou hast done this unto me." The third manner was that with great instance he besought St. Francis one day, as the greatest favor, to give him his cloak and take his instead for the love of charity. And the Father, full of charity, consenting, although unwillingly, and taking off his cloak, gave it to him, and received his in its place. And during this taking off and changing of habits, Brother Rufino plainly saw the wound. Well, we're going to stop there. We'll continue. Well, I guess we'll continue tomorrow. But tomorrow we'll also start the Novena. So we'll see how it develops. You will see you'll see a link to the Novena prayers below the description of the video, and starting tomorrow I will put out the consecration prayers here in the church. So you can come and pick one up sometime during this week, and you'll be ready for the day of consecration, which will be the feast of St. Michael. So you can pick one up this week and this coming weekend for the consecration on the feast. I'll ask you to just take one, because or even one per family. So we'll need to conserve these to make sure that everybody gets a copy. We also have a limited number of prayers that are a consecration of another soul to St. Michael. So you can pray for somebody else and consecrate somebody else. Maybe it's your child, or maybe it's your spouse, or someone close to you. Well, do join me then tomorrow for day 1 in our Novena to St. Michael the Archangel. There's been a great time so far in these 40 days of St. Michael's Lent. And in the meantime, we've gone from summer to fall. This week is an Ember Week in September, so we'll have 3 fast days this week, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. It's a good time to consecrate the season of autumn to the Lord by means of these 3 fast days, and also to be praying and offering up your fasting for those men who will be preparing for ordination to the priesthood. Well, do join me then tomorrow, and don't miss a day of prayer with us.